Thanks for listening, everyone. My name's Paddy. I'm one of the consultants here at Burendo, so thank you all for coming. We've been delighted to host. I'm going to do a quick talk called From Risky to Ready, which is about DevOps support, really, rather than anything too risky. So, what's the audience like today? Are we mainly engineers? Are there any delivery people? Any kind of management support? Hands up if you're an engineer, I guess. Okay, predominantly engineering then, predominantly engineering. So my background's delivery, bit of analysis, bit of product management, but for the last couple of years I've been running a level 2, level 3 DevOps support team, probably about 20 people. We'll talk a bit more about the context in a bit. But the kind of things my guys, in terms of engineers who I work with, get really upset about is these kind of points, and maybe some of this will resonate with you, but sometimes you go into a gig, it might be a new team, it might be a service is transitioning to you, you might be in a consultancy taking over a new service, and you're given a service and there's no documentation. You don't even know what it does, but it's like, build on top of this thing, please, or support this, you know, and do it to really strict SLAs. And by the way, if it falls over, really bad things happen. It's kind of a similar situation when you're building a service, and I think we heard from the previous speaker, you know, some really great stuff about the quality of services and the kind of build standards that are expected. When you're looking across a portfolio of services and trying to maintain a quality benchmark or standards, it can be quite difficult to understand, you know, what is good. You know, you talked about when is good enough, and I think for me it's sometimes hard to benchmark that, and sometimes the first time you really start to find out whether you know the service or whether it's good enough is when it falls over at 2 AM and you get called out of bed, and then you really start to find out, do I know what the service does? Do I understand it? You might be raising risks while these services are being transitioned into you, or you're taking them on. Sometimes some of these risks just disappear off into the ether, and when it all comes to pass, it's like the conversation never happened, right? Nobody ever told me this thing was going to fall over, but it inevitably does. I think there's a few dovetails in from the previous talk. You know, I kind of think about the quality of services or products that are built and then handed on to other people. And we talked about AI slop. We're probably not in that territory with this, but sometimes when you're given something, you want to be really comfortable that it meets a certain bar. What happens if it doesn't? So it's probably all reasonably intuitive, but if you're just picking services up with no control, no real benchmarking, there's a load of impacts that happen, but they all fall in the kind of categories we're all familiar with. So kind of iron triangle stuff, time, quality, and cost. You end up spending a bunch of time trying to understand them, trying to articulate what they do, trying to articulate your service standards. That costs money, time costs money. And in terms of quality, it's hard to build quality services without having benchmarks and things that you can do, and people are probably familiar with things like well-architected, those kind of structures, but the challenge we had when we ran into these kind of issues was with Burendo, we run, as I said, an L2, L3 managed service for DevOps within one of our large healthcare partners. We've got two, so 50-50. Take your pick. And we support dozens of services. So the team that I looked after, when we initially started the contract, we took on board about 15 services, and since then we transition in, on average, 1 or 2 a month. We probably depreciate 1 or 2 out the other end of the pipeline similarly. So we've probably got about 30 to 40 services in live support at the moment. Every tech stack you can imagine. So I talked about AWS well-architected principles, but you know, we've got Azure, we've got, think of anything, we've got 20-year-old PHP, we've got anything you can imagine. Completely different standards. And then where we really started was when we took on the contract, we had no structured framework for assessing services to understand what the risks were, transitioning them into support, and making sure that we were comfortable managing them. So we built this service, which is probably what anyone in the room would come up with if they sat and thought about it. But effectively, we go through a triage process where we validate and prioritise what services we want to transition in. We build a backlog, because that's what you do, you make work visible. And then the assessment is really where we start to do some of the nattier stuff that I'll start to talk around, where through multi-lenses we look at a service and try and figure out what's going on with it, what does it do, what are the risks, where are our heat spots, where are we going to need to improve it or build it out in the future. We have what I've called an optional step. We've actually provided to this client what we call an app modernisation team, who are a team who just sit off to one side, and where we identify that services need a bit of an uplift, we've got a modernisation team who will uplift these services to bring them to the standard that we want them to be. And they're a really multi-skilled, cross-stack team who will do all kinds of weird and wonderful things that I don't really understand. But you know, we've come across services, really legacy services, that potentially don't have lower environments, that kind of thing. You know, some really challenging situations where it's like, how do we even ship updates into this service safely? So we've had to reverse engineer services where we've had services with literally no documentation. We've had to figure out what the service does, how it works, by trawling the code. Again, I think tying into the previous talk, some of that grunt work, maybe you could throw that at Claude these days and say, read this code and tell me what this service is and what it does. We'll touch on where we might go with some of that. And then once we understand the service, we've identified the risks. If needed, we've looked at uplifting any frailties or any areas of the service that need modernising. We onboard that service into our support team. So nice, simple five-step approach. In terms of the particular pattern that I really wanted to talk to you guys about today, and the thing that we wanted to share particularly, is we kind of got this approach when we get into the assessment stage of assessing through multiple lenses. I'll talk a bit about what lenses we found work for us in a second in a bit more detail. Codifying common risks, and again, you know, everything's AI these days, but this really ties into the way that we've used AI in this approach has been led by codifying things. And in this case, I'll talk in a bit more detail about how we've done that with risks. Things that can be quite ambiguous and you have to write them freehand. Oh, I've identified this thing. Codifying it has been quite transformational. Formularising the outcome. So you get a service, someone gives it to you, you say, I don't like the look of this, it doesn't smell quite right, I've done a code review and I don't like X, Y, and Z, and by the way, it's got no proper CI/CD pipelines. Okay, that's good, but what does that really mean in terms of the SLAs that you're going to commit for that service? What supports here should be applied to it? How do you build out a backlog for improving it? All that kind of good stuff. The approach we've taken is to really formularise a lot of that and drive a lot of that out based on algorithms and logic, which is quite neat, we think. And then automate the boring bits. So we talked about grunt work and automating the grunt work. This is on our pipeline to do next. I'm not going to talk through all the different lenses. You know, it's kind of, when you're looking at it through a technical architecture, maybe more an enterprise architecture kind of lens. These are the different things that we're thinking about, but just to pick on a couple, we're thinking about primarily documentation is a thing that is surprisingly weak when we're given services quite often. Managing monitoring and alerting. So it seems to, surprisingly often in my experience across lots of clients, monitoring and alerting tends to be a thing that comes last as a nice to have. Like, oh, we need to get this operationalized. What do we need to do to kind of tick those monitoring and alerting boxes? For us as a support team, that tends to come quite late in the process and can be quite challenging. Things like code reviews, you know, we talked about code quality, all that good stuff. So I won't labour on all the different lenses, but we kind of got 9 lenses that we run through every service. It's quite a detailed questionnaire, but because we kind of formularised it, any of our engineers can pick it up and run an assessment on a service. Doesn't need to sit with our principals or our lead engineers. So quite neat. So I talked about codifying your common risks. Again, this might be something that if the majority of the people in the room are more on the engineering side, this might be something you can encourage delivery people or program people to think about if they're not already doing it. But when I say we kind of assessed probably 30 services over the last couple of years, things like no runbooks is a thing that happens all the time. It's, you know, a fact of life. Sometimes at the point we assess them, they just haven't been written. Sometimes they come later. But by codifying the risk around no runbooks, it means every time somebody assesses a service, they can say, well, that's a service support risk 001. They don't reinvent the wheel, writing a new risk about, oh, we haven't got runbooks or we haven't got certain documentation. And effectively, it makes it super simple. They can say, this lines up with SSR 001, and then sat behind that down at the bottom, each service support risk has a description of the risk in detail, what the impacts are, how it can be mitigated, and what that means to the service support tier. So, for example, if we had no runbooks, we'd probably say we're not going to support this thing 24/7 with, you know, 0 downtime because we haven't got any runbooks. So it's likely to be a reasonable endeavours type service until we've got runbooks. And codifying the risks has really helped transform how efficient it is to do an assessment. Before, every single person who did a technical assessment would write their own risks in their own style with their own, you know, this is what the impact's going to be. And now it's just bang on repeatable every single time. At the moment, we've got 31 common risks that we come across in our risk library. So a few of the more prevalent examples are called out there, but things like no IAC is quite typical. So sometimes we'll inherit services that are quite ClickOps rather than being built in Terraform or anything like that. No monitoring, I touched on before, no runbooks, those kind of things. This isn't necessarily because services haven't been built to modern standards. Sometimes we're talking about really legacy services or shadow IT that's just gone under the radar, need supporting, so we end up picking it up. So yeah, I wouldn't want to besmirch the teams that come before us, but they're the kind of common risks that we see. So once we've captured those risks, we understand what's going on, we really try to formularize the outcome. So every time we assess a service and we find out that X, Y, and Z things are missing or we've identified certain risks, what we found was that we were repeatedly going into quite challenging negotiations to say, you haven't got monitoring and alerting and you'd like this to be a tier 2 service. I'm afraid that's not possible when you haven't got monitoring and alerting. And it's quite an onerous negotiation to have with business stakeholders or sponsors. So we really formalised this and effectively we populate a questionnaire with the answers to questions like, is alerting in place? Do we have appropriate dashboards? Is it high availability, etc., etc.? And depending on the outcome, it tells us the level of support that we are willing to provide for this service. And at the end of the questionnaire, basically it works through the algorithm and it says the maximum level we can support this service at is tier 3. We take that to stakeholders and say, we push you through the sausage machine, tier 3 is what we can do. It's not an emotional negotiation, it's not really challenging, we can point at exactly what risks we're trying to mitigate. Because we've got the risk codified and we've got the risk library, we can tell them exactly what they can do about those risks to mitigate them if they want to elevate their service support tier. But it's just, it takes a lot of the challenge out of the process, especially for someone like me who has to go and have those difficult discussions, and yeah, I like it. Automate the boring bit. So where we're kind of at now is we feel like we've built our algorithms in a way that kind of works for us at the moment. It's sat in Excel, right? I'll not deny it. We've built out our library in Confluence, so we've got all our codified service support risks. The obvious next step for us is to, you know, build an app that does this, and potentially we can vibe code some of that, create some good fun stuff. But we still want people to be reviewing what comes out of that, but we feel like we've done so much great work in codifying things, building a completely repeatable process, and building the logical algorithms that effectively drive the outcomes. It's a bit of a shoe-in for pushing into an app. So what's happened as a result? For engineers, there's no mystery anymore. If I go to our engineering teams to say we're taking on board this service, one of those people assesses the service, they knowledge share with everyone else, they let them know exactly what's coming down the pipeline, what risks are inherent with that service, and what service tier it's going to be supported at. In terms of the risks, because they're codified, we literally allocate each one to its service as service support risks. That goes into its continuous improvement backlog. So as opposed to having a discussion with a business stakeholder and saying, oh, there's no monitoring, and they go, yeah, okay. What really happens is we now add that to a continuous improvement backlog, and that risk gets addressed. And if it doesn't, its service tier doesn't get uplifted until it does. Quite nice and neat. No difficult negotiations anymore around what tier services are. It's all factual. And then the kind of outputs that we use to produce, I've said a couple of times, everyone wrote what seemed to them the right way to write things. Now everyone's got a real structured template approach. Everything's drop downs. It's all seamless. So bits I'd encourage you to take away, if you can, from this talk, what I wanted to share with you. So think about if you're onboarding services or you're inheriting a new service, what are the real areas of concern? You know, what are the different lenses that I need to look through to see whether I'm comfortable that I can look after this thing? And that might be monitoring, it might be documentation, it might be, have I seen it? Have I seen somebody actually push a release through? Have I seen the pipelines executed? But think about what are the things I need to be confident that I can look after this thing. Build your risk library. Sounds such a funny thing, but this really gets me excited to talk about risk. But it's been quite transformational for me. I've been knocking around in the business for about 30 years, and this idea of just building a risk library and picking off a code to assign that has been, I love it. Like 25, 30 years of freehand writing risks every time I needed to do one. If I could codify a risk that says the team isn't big enough, you know, SSR 002, that would have saved me probably 5 years off my life. Make the outcome formulaic, so, you know, it's common sense, I suppose, but if you are going through something like a service assessment, try and build an algorithm as much as you can, and these days you can get a lot of help from Claude or Cursor or ChatGPT to build a decision-making framework with some scoring that you can then stand behind and say, look, here's the logic. If you need to tweak the logic a bit, tweak the logic a bit, but ultimately, most things now you can plug into a decision engine that you can build in moments that pop out with a really clear outcome. And then where we want to go next, again, it's aligned beautifully, but use AI for the grunt work. You'd think we'd planned it.
We have not.
We have not, but it's worked beautifully. So, as well as kind of automating as much of the assessment as we can, I was talking to one of the guys today in the office, and we're transitioning some reasonably big services. One of them I heard today has got something like 400 repos. So when you start thinking about things like GitHub Copilot, that kind of thing, we can start to ask the AI, can you go through and look at these repos and tell me what do I actually need to care about, what don't I, what's full of junk, what is actually doing something with the service. And that'll save us masses of time. So, from a kind of delivery or a support perspective, I guess DevOps maturity is where we want to strive for, but it's not really a a destination that we just get to and then we stop. We're constantly dealing with new services. We're either moving roles into new places, we're consultants who are working with new clients, or we work in support teams where people are giving us new services all the time. So it's not really a destination, but it's about having a view of where every service that you're supporting actually stands. What level of maturity is it? What tools have you got to be able to assess that? How can you articulate that consistently? And what we've kind of learned over the last couple of years is that, you know, you're not going to have a perfect estate. It's a nirvana we're never going to reach. If you're lucky, you'll work on a team looking after a single service and you'll do a great job, and I commend you. But at a portfolio level, you're never going to have a perfect portfolio. There will be some services that are suboptimal. You'll have service support risks. You'll have gaps. You can't fix everything. But what you can do is go a long way towards building a really consistent way of measuring those services and understanding what they look like and managing those risks. That's me. Thank you all.